Really excited that Melanie Wetzel, who is the principal consultant with the Job Accommodation Network, is here with us today, and I'm going to pass it on to her.
All right, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to just dive right in. I've been a consultant at Jan for 17 years. I was a special educator before I came to Jan, so I have a long background in serving individuals with disabilities, employers with disabilities. So let's get started here. I'd like to start out with a little information about JAN. That's the Job Accommodation Network. I'm going to refer to it as JAN, much easier to say. For those of you who may not be familiar with who we are and what we do, I'd like to give some basic information. JAN is a national free consulting service established in 1983. 2 years ago, we celebrated our 40th anniversary. We're the leading source of expert and confidential guidance on workplace accommodations. We do not provide legal advice. Our job is to talk about the ADA in regards to accommodations, and we love to get accommodation scenarios, talk about what the best options may be. Um, the confidential part's really important, I think, because a lot of people call anonymously or unknown. They don't want to give their name. They don't want to give out too much information. But we provide really a high level of confidentiality. In fact, if you want to get your information back from us, it takes a lot for even you to get your information. Nobody else can get that. And that confidentiality really helps, I think, talk about options. You're free to more to discuss things. And we are a service of the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP. So here is our main homepage, askjan.org. That's how you can get a hold of us. There at the right-hand bottom of, or left-hand, I'm sorry, left-hand bottom of the screen says Ask Jan, we can help. There's phone number, and then over the little red box is the employer live chat. That's a really quick way to get a hold of us for questions. We have emails. You can write a paragraph. You can fill out a form that we have. The more information we have about a situation and the limitations, and we'll talk about the limitations here in a minute, the better we can help you. The more specific you could be, the more specific we can be back. And so I just want to go over that top menu there. We have a page for employers. We have a page for individuals. That A to Z is probably going to be the most helpful. We have an A to Z listing of disabilities where you can find all types. We have a general mental health publication. We have anxiety, bipolar disorder, depression, phobias. We have all kinds of more specific disability and mental health conditions. Situations solutions finder, you can find different solutions. Now I have a lot, in my presentations, I use a lot of examples because I think that's the best way to see practically how the information I provide works. But you can go in here and find situations and solutions by job and by limitation. We have a My Jan where you can personalize your Jan information. We have over 100 publications that we have written. They're not anywhere else. They're people at Jan have written from our vast experience. Like we'll see trends and we'll see all these questions coming in, and we'll say, hey, we really need to write information about that, put our resources all together in one place to help people, and then we can send that information out as well. We have training, we have modules, well, we have recordings of trainings that we do monthly. The training's similar to what we're doing here today. And then we have a little tab of information about Jan. Okay, let's get started here. These are some common limitations that we see at Jan related to mental health conditions. And we use the word limitations because that's what the ADA talks about. Those common limitations that we see are panic, issues with memory and learning, attendance, organization and concentration, time management, sleep disturbances that may be due to, and a lot of these may be due to the conditions themselves, may be due to medication, working effectively, coworker interaction, and then stress and emotions management. Now, it's likely that nobody will have all of these. Some people may have others that we don't have listed. These are what we see as most common. And let me just say, we feel we have a good background and a good knowledge base because we talk to individuals, employers, family members, job coaches, voc rehab people, medical professionals. Um, so we feel like we talk to a wide variety of people and have a good idea of what the issues are. And people will have varying amounts of these limitations and different levels of severity. And what we always say is, we look at things on a case by case basis. It's always individualized. Now, let's say people with bipolar disorder may have a lot in common, but it really depends on how the bipolar disorder affects each individual person and what their job is and how it affects them in their job. There are a lot of commonalities, but they're also individualized. So let's talk about disclosure. Disclosure is when you give out personal disability information. And I think when we talk about mental health conditions, a lot of people are hesitant. They don't want their employer having certain types of information. They don't want them having too much information. Doctors are hesitant to provide information for their patients because they're not sure how that's going to affect their employment. And so um, we would say, if you don't want to give out specific information, maybe about your diagnosis, you can start out with more general information about a mental health condition. The main reason people disclose is to ask for accommodations. And we're going to have a lot of examples of that coming up. Also to receive benefits and privileges of employment. People with disabilities are entitled to the same benefits and privileges of employment as all similarly situated employees without disabilities. And that can include access to a lunchroom, a gymnasium, a credit union. It could be access to a birthday party that you're having for a staff member or a summer picnic that you have in a certain location. It could be the employee handbook, anything like that that's available to all employees. And then also to explain an unusual circumstance. And I have some examples of all of those coming up. This first one, here's an example of requesting accommodations. Rhonda has depression and needs to ask for the accommodation of a flexible schedule while she adjusts to new medication. She's been late a couple times to work. She doesn't want to get into disciplinary issues. She really doesn't want to disclose her disability. Then she kind of has to weigh that out. And at Jan, we cannot tell somebody, yes, you need to disclose now or you need to do it now, but we can help walk through that process. And what basically we would say is when you see that anything disability related or anything related to your medical condition that's causing an issue at work, when you first see that, you want to consider, do I need to disclose now? Because you don't want to wait too late. An employer doesn't have to excuse a performance or conduct that happened before they knew there was a disability or medical condition. And so you want to disclose it and work that out before you get too far behind in your work or you start having difficulties with conduct or behavior or something. Second example here is to receive benefits or privileges of employment. Steve has PTSD and a brain injury, and he has difficulty attending large group meetings where there are distractions of many people and lots of noise. And so for Steve to receive the benefit of the information from that meeting, he may need to attend that meeting in a different way so that he's able to participate and gain that information. And that could be attending in a remote way, attending in his office, instead of going to, an auditorium or a boardroom or something like that. And then the third way is to explain an unusual circumstance. And here we have an example of Lena, who's an office employee. She works on the first floor of the building and she's unable to use the stairs due to PTSD. It's not been a problem. And it's usually what happens. Something changes and somebody finds they have the need to disclose. In this case, the HR was on the first floor. Now the HR is moving to an upper level in the building. And for Lena to attend HR meetings, she can use the elevator. The elevator breaks frequently in her building. What happens if she has a meeting and the elevator's broken? She's unable to use the stairs. She's not going to be able to attend a meeting. So she asked for an accommodation of, if there is a meeting when the elevator's down, which may never happen, but it very well may, she can have a change in the meeting to when the elevator is fixed, or HR comes downstairs and they meet somewhere on the first floor, so she doesn't have to use the elevator. or the stairs, I'm sorry, stairs. Excuse me. So, how to disclose? The individual must let the employer know that an adjustment or change at work is needed for a reason related to a medical condition. Now, you can use plain English. You don't have to use the word ADA. You don't have to say you're asking for a reasonable accommodation, but you certainly can. Sometimes individuals are not really clear. Sometimes they don't know what they're supposed to say. They don't even know there are accommodations under the ADA. And they're just talking to their employer about some of the problems they have. Sometimes they're not very complete with what they say, and the employer's not really sure what they're saying. We would recommend using the words ADA, due to a disability under the ADA, I'm asking for reasonable accommodations. That way the employer's on high alert. They know something's coming up. It's not questionable. And we would say you can put that in writing. You can certainly have a verbal conversation and follow that up in writing. There's no requirement under the ADA to put that in writing. What we see a lot of times, excuse me, and oftentimes with mental health conditions, they're unseen. The employer is not aware of it. And so let me use the example, somebody's having trouble getting to work on time. And so they talk to the employer and they say, having trouble getting to work on time. And they don't follow up with that. And the employer doesn't know what that means. Are you out all night? Are you playing video games? You can't get up in time? What's the deal? And if the employer doesn't probe, when the employee doesn't give them any more information than that, they may skip over that and not realize it's an ADA accommodation request. And so what would really be better for the individual to say is, hey, I'm having trouble getting to work on time because of some medication I take for a medical condition. Again, that puts the employer on alert. They know that there's an accommodation request there. And if they don't have that information, the employer could probe a little bit to say, hey, what's going on? What are we talking about? How do we help you? You can always ask, how do we help? That's not assuming anybody has a disability. It's not saying, hey, do you need a reasonable accommodation? How do we help? And that gives the employee that opportunity then to talk about that. Again, sometimes I don't think they know. Sometimes employees have had a bad experience previously, and so they're hesitant to give out too much information. Sometimes they just don't know. So, under the ADA, employers can expect all employees, even those with disabilities, to meet their performance and conduct standards. The only difference is the employer would need to provide an accommodation to help an employee with a disability meet a performance or a conduct standard. And those should be uniformly applied to all employees, not leaving some employees out, not holding some to different standards, equally, uniformly across the board. And an employer must consider accommodations to help that person meet that performance standard. They don't have to lower a standard. They don't have to remove essential functions either in order to help someone. So here I have some examples of performance. In this first one, an employer requests a meeting to talk about some recent performance issues with an employee. The employee's surprised. She didn't realize her performance was as low as the employer's stating. And we see this frequently. Sometimes people who have mental health conditions or other cognitive or neurological conditions, they don't always realize where their performance may be. They may not realize they're not doing a certain thing. They may not really realize how they need to fix that. And so when the employer comes to them, they may be surprised. But this is a really good opportunity for someone to disclose. And I always say the employer needs to go to the employee gently and talk about it. You can hold that employee to that performance standard and say, hey, how do we help you get here? Here's where you need to be. Here's where you are. How do we help you? And you can be specific. Your reports are due every Friday. You're not getting them until Tuesday or Wednesday of the next week. Let's talk about that. How do we help you do that? What are the problems that we can assist you with? And that gives the employee the opportunity to disclose. And this employee disclosed that she did have some issues with depression. She didn't realize it was affecting her job the way it was, but she did need some help. Our second example here is a customer service representative for an online retailer asked to be excused from talking to people on the phone because they exacerbate his anxiety. Well, they don't have to remove an essential function, like I said. Our job at Jan is to talk on the phone, answer chats, do emails. So our employer wouldn't have to take that away from me if I said, you know what's causing me anxiety? I don't want to talk anymore on the phone. Well, instead, the employer would want specifics. Okay, how do we help you? What specifically is causing that anxiety so we can help reduce it so you can talk to people on the phone? And in this case, the employee was having some memory issues, couldn't find information quick enough on a live phone call, and felt a lot of anxiety rising because of that. So they talked about how to help him, some different materials, maybe some color coded materials, maybe some specific training, maybe shadowing someone else to see how they do it, but specifically finding out what this employee needed to reduce his anxiety so that he could talk to people on the phone. Excuse me. And here we have a couple conduct examples. Our first one here is after a few uncharacteristic outbursts, an office assistant rigged up makeshift partitions out of mailing boxes around his centrally located desk. The supervisor determined it was time to speak with him about his actions. And the thing about this was the employee had come to the supervisor and said, hey, I need a little bit more privacy. I'm having some difficulty. And the supervisor didn't pick up on that, didn't probe anything. He just said, you know what, we all need more privacy, get back to work. And the issue was that the employee was an assistant to multiple people. I'm thinking like 8, 9, 10 people. And they came at him from all directions. And he was having some difficulty with that as his condition was exacerbated. And the main issue was they were coming up behind him. He was out in the middle, people all around him. And so when the supervisor decided, hey, it's time to talk to him, he's put up mailing boxes and created some partitions. That could all been avoided, and that employee saved a little bit of exposure and dignity issues maybe if the supervisor had probed and say, okay, what are you talking about? Let's talk about what you mean. I'm not sure what you mean. What do you mean by privacy? And what they determined was they could put up a partition behind him so people only came at him from the side and the front. And then they also looked at how people did approach him, how he got his assignments and his information so that he wouldn't be so overwhelmed. But again, if the supervisor had sort of picked up on that and probed a little bit, might have been able to avoid that situation where the employee had to put up those boxes himself. In our second example, a consistently tardy employee is extremely upset because his employer has written him up for being late. His next occurrence will result in termination. Well, he has trouble getting to work on time due to ADHD and some medication he takes for a mental health condition. And so he says, I can't be on time. You have to excuse me. Well, but he didn't talk about it. He didn't disclose, he didn't explain anything. He's just late, thinking the employer just would accept that when the employer had no idea that there was any kind of condition involved. And so when the first time that happens and you're written up or you have a verbal warning or however your employer provides discipline, you need to talk about that. That might be a good time to disclose because you don't want it to go too far to where the next time you mess up, you're terminated because your employer doesn't have to excuse any of that occurred before they knew there was a disability. All right, and here we're just going to talk about the most commonly requested mental health accommodations that we see at Jan. Right now, and several years ago, but right now it's back, telework or the return to work. We have a lot of people who are being asked to return to work and they're having some difficulty with that. They've been at home for a while. They've seen how helpful it is to them, maybe balancing their work life responsibilities. Maybe it has to do with a commute and transportation. Maybe it has to do with managing their environment at home where, in an office, you can't manage everything as well as you can from home. Now, we did find that, when people were forced to go home several years ago, 5 years ago, there were people who could not work from home. They couldn't structure their day properly, or there were too many people at home. I remember talking to somebody who said, I can't do this. My wife's at home, my kids are at home, we're all sitting at the dining room table. I can't concentrate. And so looking at telework or the return to work, employers want to be careful about blanket policies with no exceptions. They're always to look on a case-by-case basis to look if somebody needs an accommodation under the ADA and somebody may need to remain at home to work because of a disability. Maybe somebody hasn't been working from home and now needs to. Maybe somebody needs to continue to. Sometimes they'll say, well, before we were forced to go home, this person didn't need telework. Okay, that was a while back and that has changed. And so you always want to look at conditions now. How does that work? And you can provide accommodations of telework for someone with a disability if you don't provide that for other people. And that's a modified workplace policy. And we're going to talk about that in a couple slides. This is slide 12. I'm sorry, I'm not accustomed to using the slide numbers and I forgot about that. This is slide number 12. You want to engage the employee in the interactive process. You always want to find out what's going on and talk to the employee, why they need that accommodation. You always want to evaluate those accommodation requests on a case-by-case basis, not just say, hey, nobody teleworks. You want to look at who has a medical condition. You want to find out what that need is to telework. If they have been teleworking and they've been able to do that effectively, does that need to change? Why does that need to change? And the really important thing is you want to consider temporary or extended accommodations while going through that process. Now at Jan, we're really big on talking about temporary or trial accommodations. So if somebody's already been teleworking and they've been successful, allow them to continue to telework while you go through this process of determining whether you can continue to allow that. If somebody hasn't been and they need to, if it's not a big expense, try it. Do it on a trial basis. Meet back after you've had enough time to evaluate the effectiveness of it, to see if it will work. And let me tell you why that's important. We talk to a lot of people at Jan. My team has 4 members, and we talk to people all day long. People have told us that when they're forced to go back to work before they're ready, before they've had advance notice, it can be very difficult. Their performance can suffer. That's not good for anybody. They may need to take leave to handle their anxiety levels, and that's going to create issues because if they were working effectively, they didn't need leave, their performance was good. Now it's not. It's kind of messed up because they've been forced to go back to work. We've even heard of people saying, they need to increase their medication in order to handle that anxiety. And that's not going to be good for them or for the employer. And so you want to look at what's best for the employer and what's effective, but also what works for the employee. These resources at the bottom are going to be helpful. We have one on telework. We have telework accommodation request flowchart. And then we have listed the enforcement guidance, reasonable accommodation and undue hardship under the ADA. That's an EEOC guidance, and question number 34 talks about telework. All right, now I'm on slide number 13. Leave is probably one of the most frequently requested accommodations that we see on our team for mental health. And it's often a misunderstood accommodation because employers sometimes feel that, okay, accommodations are put in place to help somebody work. And that's true. So if you're asking for leave as an accommodation, you're not going to be at work. How's that going to help you work? But it really can help you work because it can help the employee get the rest, get the recuperation, get the treatment they need so that they can come back and fully work. So there are difficulties for the employer, and those include unscheduled leave, indefinite leave, leave after FMLA, and then hardship related to leave. So let me talk about each one of those. Unscheduled leave can be difficult. Sometimes an employee will have a doctor's note that says, they might need up to 2 or 3 days per month off when they feel their anxiety is exacerbated. And so the employer says, okay, let's have you off the first, second, third Tuesdays of every month. You need 3 days, there you go. Well, somebody with a mental health condition may not know when their condition is going to be exacerbated. And so it may not be the first Tuesday, the second Tuesday, the third Tuesday, or whatever the employer comes up with. And it may be difficult for the employer to have somebody need tomorrow off and need next Friday off without advanced warning. And that's something that they need to discuss and maybe provide on a trial basis. We think we can allow you 2 days off a month. Let's see how this works. And then we'll talk about that. Can you let us know as quickly as possible when you need to be off? Depending on the job and how the employer schedules that work when the employee's gone, it may vary from department to department. And also, it may depend on seasonal issues, such as some employers will say, retail, we can't have a lot of people off frequently at Christmas. It's too busy. January, February, sure, but not in the middle of the holidays. We need all hands on deck. Could be like, say, right now, plant nursery workers. We need everybody there working. We can't allow people to have a lot of time off. It may depend on the size of the department. If you have a lot of people in one department, you might be able to allow somebody to have more time off than if you have two people who have very specialized jobs in a department and that person really needs to be at work. And so sometimes looking at alternate accommodations, what can we provide to help you so that you don't require that much time off? That can be a solution. Indefinite leave means leave with no return date. And that can mean when somebody has a severe exacerbation of their symptoms, maybe they're hospitalized, the employer gets a note from the doctor that says the employee has been hospitalized. We're not sure when they'll be back to work. Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean you can try to get more information from the doctor, the medical professional. Exactly what does that mean? Does it mean a couple weeks? Does it mean a couple months? Sometimes if there's no return date, that can be very difficult because how do you plan for that? Indefinite leave can also mean, and we see this frequently, where somebody asks for, let's say, a month off. I need a month off of leave, then I can come back to work. And the employer approves that and says, yeah, we can do a month. So when it comes close to the end of that month, the employee sends another note in that says, hey, I'm not going to be able to come back. I need another month off. Okay, well, gee, I don't know about this because we thought we could do 4 weeks. We're not sure we can do 8 weeks. So and that's how that should be determined. Each time should be determined. Yes, we can do it for 4 weeks. If it's extended, let's determine on a case by case basis, depending on this person's job, can we do more? So let's say they decide, yeah, we can do 8, but that's about it. So at the end of that second 4 weeks, the employee sends a note back in that says it can't come back. That could be a request for indefinite leave because the employer may not really have confidence that the employee is coming back or when because they haven't been able to come back when the doctor has stated. Leave after FMLA. FMLA is federal medical leave, and that is 12 weeks. Can be taken in a chunk. It can be taken intermittently. And leave under the ADA can be taken that same way. It's not limited to 12 weeks, but it's not unlimited either. It's limited to how much time the employer can allow before it causes a hardship. But they can be taken in hours. For medical appointments, it can be taken a day here and there. It can be taken extended. And if somebody has taken off 12 weeks and then they still need more time off, that can be difficult for the employer. And they can determine, again, on a case by case basis, how do we do that? Can we allow that? And maybe the person just needs another week. Maybe they need another month. It just depends on their job, the season, the department, and how the employer's business is affected by that leave. And they want to document that as well, how it affects the business. And then hardship related to leave is exactly that. How does that affect the business? And hardship's a high bar to meet. It can't just be, well, it's a little inconvenient for us. It has to meet that higher standard. And it depends on the size of the business. A smaller company may be affected a lot sooner than a larger company. And we have information here that helps. We have ADA leave beyond the FMLA. That's a publication that can help. Employer provided leave in the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is an EEOC guidance and it is excellent. There is a section about 2/3 of the way down in that publication that talks about undue hardship related to leave, and it gives 5 or 6 points to help you determine that. Talks about documentation. We have applying performance and conduct standards to employees with disabilities. There's a section there. That's an EEOC guidance as well. There's a section on attendance, and then the enforcement guidance we talked about earlier. There's a section there on leave that can help you better understand that. Modified schedule. That's probably the second most requested accommodation after leave. And a modified schedule can mean anything. It can mean anything that works for the employee as long as it works for the employer. And that can be 4 10-hour days instead of 5 8-hour days. It could be longer breaks. It could be combining all your breaks to have longer time at lunchtime to take a rest or to do exercise. It could be taking a longer lunch and breaking it up into more breaks so that you can get up and walk around the building, do deep breathing exercises, something like that. employer policies often prohibit a consistent schedule. Some employees say, I really need a consistent schedule because of my sleep schedule and the medication I take. I'm thinking retail, but it's not always retail where they say, you have to be available. You have to be at restaurants. You have to be able to work when we say you need to work. Okay, so let's say they're scheduled till 11 o'clock one night and the next morning they're scheduled at 7 o'clock. They may not really work for people who take medication and need set amounts of sleep, need time to unwind after they come home. And so a more consistent set schedule can be very helpful. A condensed schedule, like I talked about, having working 4 8-hour days. Sometimes people will work a Monday and Tuesday 10 hours and have Wednesday off, work Thursday and Friday, have the weekend off. And it gives them that break in the middle of the week and they're better able to work and complete the functions of their job. And can this be done for this person, even if it's not done for anybody else? If they need supervision and a supervisor's not there, that's probably not going to work. If they need to serve customers and they can't serve customers in those 2 extra hours, those 4 days, that's probably not going to work either. And that's why it's determined on a case by case, individualized basis. And again, if you think it might work, do it on a trial basis. Let's try it for a month. Let's see how it works. Let's come back and talk about it. A reduced or part-time schedule. EEOC says that can be an accommodation. An employer really needs to determine if that's possible, if it doesn't cause a hardship. Some employers will say, we just don't have part-time jobs. Okay, but let's change that for this employee and consider a part-time job. And an important thing to consider is how long do they need that? Is it going to be for 4 weeks? Is it going to be for 2 months? Is it going to be permanent? Sometimes if it's permanent, it might be a request for a reassignment to a part-time job. But maybe it's possible to reduce hours for somebody on a part-time or on a temporary or trial basis and work back up. Sometimes people transition back up to full-time. Sometimes they just want to work an hour less each day. So 5 hours less each week. Is that doable? Well, we're not sure if it is. Let's see. You don't have to remove essential functions from a job, but you could remove marginal functions so that the person has time in those reduced hours to get the essential functions done. An adjusted break schedule is very important. A lot of people need some adjusted breaks. Some people say, I need a 15-minute break every hour. Well, employers don't have to provide any more paid leave to an employee with a disability than they do to anybody else, because 15-minute break every hour, you work 8 hours, that's 2 hours you're not working. That's probably not going to be reasonable. But being creative in how that works, I think I mentioned earlier, breaking a lunch up. I have an hour lunch. Let me take 30 minutes for lunch and two 15-minute extra breaks or 3 10-minute breaks. Can I come in early so that I can work and then take breaks? Can I stay, later? How do we do this creatively so that the person can get some more breaks in there to help them deal with anxiety or other issues related to their mental health? This is slide number 14. We have enforcement guidance on reasonable accommodation. There's a section in there on modified schedule. And then we also have information on modified break schedule. All right, now moving to slide 15, modified policies. Employers will say, can we do that? Or do we have to do that? You don't have to do that if it creates a hardship, but it's really something to consider. And that's modifying a policy for someone with a disability that you don't change for others. Could be a telework policy. It could be a part-time reduced schedule policy. It could be allowing somebody to have water at a workstation when that's not something that you allow because they take medication and they're thirstier. It may be allowing more restroom breaks because they take medication and they need to get to the restroom more frequently. Other policies that need modified are animals. Some employers have a no animal policy. Okay, so somebody asks to bring their service animal or their support animal, employer may need to change that policy of no animals for this person, no one else, but for this person, so that they can bring that dog with them. Training. We see this a lot. Employers will say, well, we have a set training time and that's it. If you don't get that training in that time, you don't get it. Well, that may be a policy that really needs to be changed because someone with a disability may need different types of training or they may need an extended training time. Now, I've talked to employers who say after 18 months, an employee's still in training and not out on the floor doing the job. That's probably an excessive amount of time. if they say, well, we normally allow training for 2 months and then people are out doing the work, okay, let's consider how much more training does this person need? Case by case basis again. Do they need an extra 2 weeks? Do they need an extra month? Is that possible? Is that doable? Can they work part-time and do some of the jobs on the floor, and then still have extended training? Do they need more time with a trainer? Do they need alternate materials? What do they really need that you can change your policy for so that somebody's able to learn what they need to learn in order to do the job? Attendance. Some employers have no fault attendance policies that say you miss 7 days. Uh, you have 7 days. If you miss 8, you're terminated. Well, somebody with a disability may need more than 7 days off. And so the employer needs to look at that. Can we provide more days for this person, even if we don't for somebody else? Doesn't mean you allow unlimited days. There's still a limit. Just because somebody has a disability doesn't mean they have an unlimited time off. But again, you can look, and somebody in one department, you may allow them to have more time off than someone else in a department where you'd have to limit that time off due to the nature of their business, again, on a case by case basis. But you don't have to allow somebody to just come and go as they please, if it affects your business. And again, that policy on leave, uh, that EEOC guidance that I talked about on that leave slide could be very helpful to help determine that as well. Modified schedule. We just don't do that. We just don't allow that. Well, is that something that can be modified for this person? Again, let's try it on a trial basis. I've heard employers say, we don't have part-time schedules, go out on leave. And that really doesn't make sense to me, because wouldn't it be more beneficial to the employer to have somebody working part-time rather than not working at all? I know at Jan, like when we're really busy, it'd be much better to have one of my colleagues working half the time and help out with our caseloads than working not at all. And if they're not working at all, they're burning up their leave, and it's possible that they can work part-time, and that way they're only burning up half of their leave. And allowing phones for apps. Now, this may seem silly at this point, but we get a lot of requests for that. People are used to using their phones and the apps they have on their phones. They get into certain jobs, they're not allowed to use their phone on the job. Employer says, no phones. Can't use your phone. And I guess people maybe have abused their policy. Maybe there are security issues. But if somebody with a disability is accustomed to using their phone for apps to help them stay organized or concentrate, it really could be beneficial for the employer to change that policy and say, okay, we're going to allow you to use your phone for these apps, and then we're going to evaluate if that's a good idea, if that was effective, if you're able, if you're still able to do your work. And we have here on our resources our EEOC guidance. I think that's on every page. You can see how useful that is. We have a link there to policies on our page, and then we have a link for service animal publication. That can be very helpful. Communication. This is big, especially I think since people have been working from home. I think people have been, because they're working from home, they're more isolated. They've chosen some not to communicate, but because you're not together, your chances to communicate aren't as frequent, and so in-person communication may be difficult. Due to a disability, communication may be difficult. So a lot of people ask for instructions in writing. I think that's an excellent accommodation. Sometimes there may be difficulty with uh, hearing instructions in verbally in a meeting, maybe taking good notes and then forgetting. Have difficulty writing all that down. My supervisor comes in and says, you need to do boom, boom, boom. If I don't write it down right then, I can't remember it. And so receiving instructions in writing can be very helpful to help somebody remember what they need to do, mark it off. Now, sometimes somebody will ask for, I need a list of everything I need to do every day. And that may not be possible. That may be take a lot of time for a supervisor to do, and somebody really may need to be working independently. But I think when there's an exacerbation of symptoms, if there are new parts in a job, somebody really may need some help with instructions in writing. In-person communications with coworkers. Some people are saying, I don't want to talk to my coworkers. I'm unable to talk to my coworkers. I can't do that. And maybe that can be made fewer. lessen those communications, but some jobs may require that. If it's an essential function to communicate with people, maybe it doesn't have to be in person. Maybe it doesn't have to be in a meeting. Maybe it doesn't have to be one-on-one. It can be done in email. Maybe it can be done remotely. I can attend a meeting remotely and I'm not face-to-face with people. Again, employers should determine that on a case-by-case basis based on the essential functions of the job. Some people ask for limited contact with a supervisor or a change in a supervisor. EEOC's made it really clear in their guidance that uh, change in supervisor is not reasonable. So an employer doesn't have to do that. What they would look at is a change in supervisory method. Here's a really good example. Supervisor is this big guy, and he just has this outgoing, boisterous personality. And one employee is just shivering and quaking when he talks because she feels he's yelling at her. When they talk about that, she says she needs a new supervisor. When they talk about it, she explains. They talk to him. He's mortified. He had no idea that he was coming across that way. And so they work with her to understand, help her understand this is his way of communicating, but we're going to work with him to stop that. He's not going to be as loud and boisterous with you. Maybe he can provide more accommodations, or I'm sorry, instructions in writing, in email, and not have as much face-to-face interaction. Some people are asking for no phone calls with clients. If that's an essential function, that does not have to be removed. And I spoke about this earlier, how you need to get to the specifics. Why can't you take phone calls? Let's talk about that. You need to take phone calls. Let's help you be able to do that. How do we reduce the anxiety or the stress or whatever the issue is so that you can make those phone calls? A modified schedule to avoid in-person contacts. Some people are saying, hey, can I work when nobody's in the office? If I have to come in 2 days a week, can I do that when nobody's there? Maybe so. I talked to an employer a couple weeks ago and they said, most people are working Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and having Mondays and Fridays off. Can we have this employee come in Mondays and Fridays when there's hardly anybody there? And I said, I think that's a great accommodation. They're saying they can't have a lot of in-person contact. There's not a lot of in-person contact going on those days. Some people say, hey, can I come in and work like 3 to 11 when nobody's there? And that may be possible, depending on the person's job. If they have to talk with clients between 8 and 5, that's not going to work. But maybe they work independently and they're able to work those hours. 100% telework. Again, that's a big request in order to avoid communications or in-person contacts. We've gotten used to being home alone and isolated, and it's difficult for some people with mental health conditions, anxiety, to go back into the office. And again, that's something that an employer would consider. So here are the resources. Again, that enforcement guidance, question and answer number 33. Issues with supervisor. We have information on our website. And then we wrote a publication, Difficulty Assisting on the Phone, because we got so many phone calls from employers and people who said, I can't, I took this customer service job, but I can't talk on the phone. So that gives some really good solutions. And I'm just going to talk briefly here about medical documentation because that comes up very frequently. From whom? Well, it would be an appropriate medical provider. For mental health conditions, we might think that's a psychologist or psychiatrist. And let me just say that in the last several years, with mental health conditions rising, there aren't enough specialists to go around and people are waiting and waiting and waiting to get an appointment, and they can't wait that long for accommodations. And maybe their own family doctor could provide more pertinent information than a new referral to a psychologist. Sometimes a specialist will say, well, I need to see you, 3 or 4 times before I write documentation. And so their own family doctor who knows them and knows what they've been going through might be able to provide that documentation. And they only need enough current documentation to show that they're having an issue now. Here's the issue. Here's how it's affecting their job. And here's some accommodations that might help. When they ask for an accommodation or when the employer sees that they're unable to do their job and they look from what they've been able to observe that the person is unable to do their job due to a medical reason, or they feel like they might be a direct threat to others. And how often? Some employers want to recertify every 6 months. That's not really necessary. Recertification is not necessary. If somebody has a long-term or a more permanent disability, the employer doesn't need information on that. Now, if they see something change, they might need information on how this is changing. Somebody asks for different additional accommodations that the original documentation doesn't cover, they might need information then. But sometimes it's better just to talk to the individual and say, hey, how's it going? Monitor those accommodations to see if they're working. If they're not, make some changes rather than trying to get recertification, because that forces the employee to go to the doctor. They have to pay for that. Sometimes doctors aren't wanting to do that, but only once a year. And so we would suggest really looking at how we get that information and how we monitor those accommodations. And this is slide 18. We have different publications here: medical exams and inquiries, a flexible approach to documentation, recertifying the ongoing need for accommodations, and then medical providers' role in client requests for reasonable accommodation. This is an EEOC guidance. Question and answer number 9 helps the doctor understand how they can help the employee and what they need to provide. It's excellent there. Here we have our resources. This is slide 19, JAN resources and EEOC guidances. Questions. Do we have any questions?
Yes, there have been questions going on throughout the chat, which has been great. So I will go to the top and kind of work my way down and see which ones we can answer. So, does an employer have to grant ADA extension after FMLA ends?
They have to consider it. They have to consider it, and on a case by case basis determine, can we do that? If the like say 12 weeks really uh, was a hardship and they really need to have that employee back, then they might not have to provide that. But they would always want to look at alternate accommodations. We can't provide any more leave. What do we do to help you? Can we provide part-time work? Can we allow you to work from home? What do you need in order to come back to work and be able to do your job?
What can you do if your employer has stated only physically disabled people can have extended remote work and they did not offer any other potential accommodations for mental health disability?
Oh, I don't know. That's difficult because we can send information that says, the definition of disability is for mental or physical impairments. And so you can't just pick and choose which disabilities to accommodate. You need to look, specifically at the limitations, why that person needs that. And Jan might be able to help somebody uh, give them the information they need to write a letter back to their employer documenting, hey, here's why I need this. As a person with a depression, I'm entitled to accommodation, same as somebody who has a physical impairment. And it may take some even a complaint process sometimes if they can't get through that way. But we suggest putting that in writing so you have that documentation that you did try to work with your employer. So if you do need to file a complaint, you have that documentation. I took these steps and they didn't respond.
Yeah, here's a longer one. So, you may cover this in your presentation. For a medical center, many policies and departments require in-person work. We get a lot of people requesting a modified schedule or the ability to work from home. Employer says the essential functions require in-person duties of seeing patients, scheduling patients, etc. Related to that, employers are often short. Oops. I hate when it flips and then I get back where I was. Let's see. Are often short-staffed and say it's an undue hardship because we are a busy clinic and need employees. How would,
Right. So if the employee's job is in person and they need to see patients, how do they do that from home? I remember a person whose job was weighing infants and she was going to do that from home. How are you going to do that from home? Are they coming to your home? If they're coming to an office, you need to be in that office to do that job. If you cannot do that, I don't want to sound harsh here, but maybe you're not qualified for that job. If you're truly unable to go to the office and those tasks require you to be there, then you're not qualified. Maybe is it possible to have all your admin tasks due on one day and you take one day off a week or 2 hours a day to do administrative tasks or something like that? An employer could look at something like that or accommodate them in some other way. But I don't see how medical people could do their job from home. That's just not possible.
yeah.
At this point, maybe later when they have all those robots, that go from office to office and help out. But right now, I don't see how that would be possible if you're seeing patients in the office.
Yeah. So we have a question about sensory processing and processing information slowly. We get so many emails and information daily, it can be difficult to stay on top of it. It is also difficult to retain the information since having to move through it so quickly, including with memory issues due to CPTSD, changes presented in meetings, policies. Um, what type of accommodations could be requested to support?
Maybe some training in how to uh, organize emails, um, color code emails, um, maybe information in meetings, having somebody that's able, if meetings can be recorded, sometimes employers will not record meetings. That can be very helpful for people because then they can go back and listen and get the information they need. Maybe have one person that's really good at taking notes. Taking good notes requires good essential functions because you have to be able to listen and write and hear what's coming up next and write that and keep on it. And some people are really good at that. Can one person take notes and distribute that to everybody as a service? Because, we've found that there are accommodations that an employer will put in place for someone with a disability that benefit others. And if they don't need them, they delete them, they toss them. But a lot of people may benefit from that because they may have had trouble concentrating in an office. We have a publication on difficulties with executive functioning, talks about organization and multitasking and concentration. And there are some really good ideas in there for people with cognitive issues.
And I can say, as someone who's used the Job Accommodation Network website very often to help think about accommodations or just even give me ideas, I
Mhm.
do recommend to all of you to check it out because it's really very helpful.
Thank you.
Another question, I've been using it for years. Many of our employees are taking 12 weeks through FMLA, then additional 12 weeks through state paid leave, which is also protected. This becomes a challenge to run the business when we have multiple people doing this. Any suggestions?
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. That is a long time. That is 6 months. Um, hmm. Well, that's a good question because if that's protected, there's really nothing you can do about that. Um, you can reass if it you can reassign somebody to another position temporarily. You have to be able to put them back in that same position after that. But some employers are saying we don't have a lot of empty positions just hanging around to put somebody into. Is it possible to reassign somebody to a position that you could leave open and doesn't require that attendance to do those essential functions? But then you'd need somebody to fill that position. I don't know. You don't have to bump somebody out of a job. You don't have to move people around. I don't know. That would require some flexibility, and you don't have to provide. You want to be careful about overloading other employees. We hear from employers who say, we have so many people out that I'm doing 3 jobs and I can't keep up. So that's difficult too. Maybe looking at just the essential functions of the job and spreading those kind of out and not requiring everyone to do the marginal functions so that people aren't overworked. I don't know. That is difficult. That's 6 months off. Yeah.
So I think maybe we have time for, oh wait, we have plenty of time. What are the next steps if employers say, no, we cannot modify policies for an accommodation?
I think looking at um, that EEOC guidance and providing that little paragraph. That's what I'll send that to somebody and I'll say, if you feel comfortable providing this to your employer, say, here's some information that I obtained from the Job Accommodation Network that's a little different than what you're telling me. Can we talk about this? And it says, can an employer modify policies? Yes, absolutely. Unless it causes hardship, blah, blah, blah. And let the employer look at that because sometimes they'll say, well, it's not fair to others. That has nothing to do with providing accommodations, and that is not a hardship. If it affects someone else's job, that could be a hardship, but not fairness or morale issues, not at all. And we have a publication about that as well, that employers can make those changes. And then sometimes they don't want to explain it to someone else who says, you know what, if so and so is working from home, how come I can't work from home? And the employer doesn't always want to deal with that. And EEOC has guidance on that too, to say, hey, if you have issues and you need something on the job, we're happy to talk about that, but we don't talk about other employees. We keep all that information private. They're meeting, we're meeting our federal, we're meeting federal laws. They're meeting their performance goals. Go back to work. One EEOC attorney at a conference I was at said, tell somebody, mind your own business and go back to work. I think they're probably going to need a little bit more information than that. But dealing with those employees would be up to the employer, but they can't use that as an excuse not to change a policy.
Right. So I'm going to take one more question in the interest of time, and then just encourage everyone again to reach out to the Job Accommodation Network. You can also
Yes.
reach out to the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. We're happy to talk through a lot of these individual issues that some of you are having and questions you have, and help you through them. So the last one, do you have any suggestions on ways that employers can explain why some employees have accommodations without disclosing to coworkers the nature of the accommodated workers' disabilities?
Yes, you cannot. Yes, absolutely. You cannot do that. You cannot say they have accommodations. Their work schedule, whatever, has been adjusted for personal reasons. If you need something for a personal reason, you come to us and you can ask us. But we don't discuss other employees and what their needs are. We have a strict confidentiality policy, and we would keep your information and your needs confidential as well. And that's really all you have to say. Because
Yeah.
you do want to be careful that you don't give out any information about a medical condition or say accommodation, because then that leads to somebody knowing that somebody has a disability or medical condition.
Yes. Thank you so much, Melanie, for presenting with us today. Such a great presentation, so much information.
I
Clearly, we
know.
spared a lot of questions, which is always a good sign that people are getting a lot of good information. So thank you for that. Here are some upcoming ADA Center events. Please join us for these events. There's one on June 3rd about intersectionality, unpacking discrimination, stigma, and multiple marginalization. We also have understanding and supporting ADHD in the workplace from awareness to action. That will be on June 25th. And information about registration will be coming soon. So look out for that information when you get your emails from us. Slide 12. We're also hosting a transition conference. So anybody that's interested in that particular area of people with disabilities coming out of the school system and how to access employment and community services and other kinds of things and help prepare them for that, we have information about that on our website. There's also the QR code to help you get to the registration for that event. We're hosting it twice. It's the same conference both times. Is there anything else? Slide 13. Yes. I did see some people asking how to contact us, so I'm glad this slide is here. I figured it would be. There's our phone numbers as well as our email addresses. So that if you do have questions about specific accommodations you're requesting or your business and you're asking about how to make the best accommodations for people, feel free to reach out to us directly. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you at the next webinar.